This is Baghdad to Detroit, the journey of one Muslim to Christ, Grandview Church of Christ in Des Moines, Iowa, September 13th through 16th, 2015.
Welcome back. In the past hour, we learned the biblical roots of the religion of Islam and how the ground and the time was prepared for a faith to be born and to grow very fast. We learned that there was a prophet that was expected. Jews and Jewish Christian heretics who had a confused idea about God and about Jesus and about the sufficiency of the scriptures, they were actually still expecting the prophet of Deuteronomy 18. A great nation was born. That would be the Arab nation. That was not a nation in the usual definition of a nation. It was not ruled by a central government. It did not have any army. It was actually made up of tribes fighting each other. And they were desperately in need of someone who gives them an identity and to unite them and to give them some prestige in the face of the two major superpowers of the world back then, the Persian and the Roman Empire. So in this hour, we will focus on the life of Muhammad and the history of Islam. With over 1.5 billion Muslims around the world, Islam is over 22% of the world's population, so more than 1 per every 5 people that ever existed on this earth are Muslims. It is the second largest religion in the world, but not for long, because it is the fastest growing religion in the world for many factors. Social, the fact that there is a non-return valve between Islam and other religions, so people can flow easily into Islam and cannot flow easily from Islam to other religions without getting in trouble. 21 out of the 22 Arab countries are Muslims. The only Arab country that is not a Muslim is a new Arab country called South Sudan, a country that was born in 2011. And I am supposed to have a map here. Okay. I am smarter than I think. 50 out of the 258 countries of the world are Muslim. So still, Islam is a fifth of the world, and of the countries of the world, it is almost in one block. These are countries that has Islam as the official religion of that country. Not necessarily the Sharia law as the state constitution. So there are some Islamic countries, and there are just countries who have an Islamic majority and a Muslim majority. But they are still secular. Iraq, believe it or not, has always been a secular country. Iran and Saudi Arabia are Islamic countries, countries that have the Sharia law as the state constitution. The word Islam means submission. Islam actually, as a religion, started when Muhammad called people to submit to God after the manner of those who believe in the Bible. It was not supposed to be a separate religion. We will learn, I think, about the development of Islam tonight or tomorrow. I don't know. So it started as a way that just means, especially for those Arabs who did not know God, who were pagans, submit yourself to God. That's how you become a Muslim. Later, Islam became a separate religion, but an alternative way to God. And even later, Islam became the only way to God, and Muhammad started to wage war against anyone who did not convert to Islam. That explains the confusion in the Quran that has peaceful passages and violent passages. Allah is just an Arabic word that means God. The God, Al-Ilah. Of course, God is pictured in a completely different way in the Quran than the Bible. So you can safely say that Muslims do not worship the same God of the Bible, even though they believe that they were worshiping the God that appeared to Moses in the burning bush. The Muslim scripture is the Quran. It is divided into 114 surahs, so it is almost 3 times bigger than the New Testament. Many Muslims memorize the whole Quran. All Muslims memorize at least a part of the Quran to help them in their prayers. In Iraq, I'll be sharing that in my testimony on Wednesday evening, Lord willing. We had to learn the Quran when Saddam Hussein was turning Iraq from a secular country to a more Muslim community. He ordered the Quran to be taught in all the Iraqi schools before graduation from high school. So we studied the whole Quran in school. And I went to secular schools. The Quran is the first, number one, source of the Islamic faith and legislations. The hadith, or the sayings of Muhammad, as believed by Muslims to be separate from the Quran, which is believed to be the word of God, is the second primary source of the Islamic faith and law. The word Sharia simply means law. By the way, in all the Arabic translations of the Bible, you'll be surprised to see and to read words that normally repels Americans. Sharia is used to describe the law of Moses in the Bible, in the Arabic Bible. Jacob tells us to submit to God in Jacob 4:7. In Arabic, be Muslims. Jude tells us in verse 3 of his message to contend earnestly for the faith. The word for content is jihad. Every Muslim must do 5 things called the 5 pillars of the Islamic faith. Yes, sir, thank you. The 5 pillars of Islam, we will be talking about that the day after tomorrow, when we will be talking about how to reach out to the Muslims with the gospel. Let us always remember that the most important question that we should ever ask is only directly asked and directly answered in the Bible. And that question is, what must I do to be saved? The Quran does not answer that question. Muslims will tell you, if you just confess there is only one God and that Muhammad is his prophet, then you will be saved. No. You will have to do the 5 pillars of Islam. In addition to the confession, you will have to do the ritual prayers, the salat. You have probably seen Muslims do a series of movements. Do I have my microphone? Yeah. 5 times every day. You do not miss any of these prayers, or you have lost your Muslim identity. You will have to give alms. That's the zakat. You will have to fast for a whole month, the month of Ramadan, from sunrise to sunset. You do not eat or drink. And you have to do the Hajj, or the pilgrimage, which the Muslims will be doing in only a few days from now. And that is the only pillar of Islam that you only have to do if you are capable. You don't have to do if you're not capable. Am I saved now, according to Islam? No. In addition to that, you will have to do countless things under the Sharia law, and you will never be granted salvation. A Muslim must do 5 things. A Muslim believes in 6 things called the 6 pillars of the Islamic faith. Next slide, please. Yes, sir. We know the song Trust and Obey. In Islam, it is obey and trust. You have to convert to Islam and do what Islam says first, In fact, there is actually a verse in the Quran that says, well, become Muslim first and then believe in what Islam teaches. A Muslim must believe in 6 things. God, His scriptures, that would be the Bible and the Quran. We'll be learning about the confusion. Okay, I ask Muslims, do you believe in the Bible? And they say, yes, we do, because Islam tells us to believe in the Bible. And I was like, okay, here's the Bible, believe in it. Then they would say, this Bible that you have is not the original Bible that we are commanded to believe in. We do believe in a Bible that does not exist anymore. A Muslim has to believe in God's messengers, the angels, the last day, and predestination, good and evil. Muhammad was the creator of Islam, although Muslims regard him as the last messenger of God. This is important to distinguish between Muslims and the followers of the nation of Islam. They are not the same, even though politically they have found themselves to be on the same side. Muslims believe that Muhammad is the final prophet. It is an utter blasphemy to consider that any prophet came after Muhammad. Of course, the nation of Islam believes that some prophets appeared in the 20th century. So that is the main difference. Plus many other differences between Islam and the nation of Islam. So we will learn about the life of Muhammad, who was born in that time when the ground, as we learned in the first hour, was prepared for the religion of Islam to be born. Most Arabs were pagan. They had some Jews and Christians, not the same Jews and Christians, not Old Testament Jews or New Testament Christians as we know them. But certain heresies were there. They were separate tribes. You see that white vacuum between Persia, the Persian Empire and the Roman Empire? That is Arabia, known today as Saudi Arabia, because it is ruled by the Saud family, the King Saud family. And it was not a nation. Arabs were hungry and thirsty for an identity and someone who unites them and gives them a faith that is Arabic. Does not make them followers of the Hebrew people, because Judaism is for Hebrews and Christianity is for the Turks or the Romans or whatever. So they needed an Arabic identity. Surrounded by the 2 superpowers of the Lord's power, it was then when a Bible prophecy was about to be fulfilled. The prophecy of the angel of the Lord to Hagar when she was pregnant. You have a child, you will call his name Ishmael, he will be a great nation, his hand against everybody and everybody's hand against him, which means that he will be a troublemaker. That prophecy was fulfilled in Muhammad, who is the direct descendant, next slide please, of Ishmael. By the way, I am the direct descendant of Muhammad. A lot of people were surprised when I told them that. In fact, Arabs are composed of tribal, the Arab community is tribe structured. And every tribe keeps a record of all the people in that tribe, so they can trace their genealogy all the way to Adam. And Muhammad is the direct descendant of Ishmael, and obviously is the fulfillment of that prophecy in Genesis 16. Next slide, please. He was born in Mecca, a city in Saudi Arabia. You heard it in the news a few days ago when that tower crane fell on the Grand Mosque. That's when Muhammad was born, in the year 570 AD. His father died before he was born. His mother died at the age of 6. His grandfather raised him up, and then his uncle. He worked as a shepherd in his youth. Then he became a merchant. At the age of 25, he married a rich, noble, 40 years old woman by the name Khadija, who invented her money in Muhammad's business. At that time, Muhammad is believed to be, of course we cannot confirm because resources can, the Islamic history resources can be so biased, you cannot trust them. They believe that he had a certain faith. He did believe in the one God, but he did not follow the Jewish or the Christian faith. But there was actually a man that was very influential in Muhammad's life, a man by the name Waraqah bin Nawfal, who is a priest of one of those Jewish Christian heresies called the Abionite Church. A belief that believes that Jesus is a prophet but not the Son of God, and He's the Messiah too. They believed that you had to fulfill the law of Moses to be saved. They denied the apostleship of Paul. To anyone who is not familiar with Islam, this sounds like any heresy that was born in the church history and died. To those who are familiar with Islam, this is exactly what Muslims believe. That church was immortalized by the religion of Islam, was survived by Islam. At the age of 40, Muhammad used to go meditating in a cave called Hijra. There is a picture after it. I don't know, does this make a difference? A cave in this mountain called the Mount of Light, 2 miles away from Mecca, as a practice by the Ebionites that Muhammad was hanging out with. This is, by the way, everything that I'm using now is according to the Islamic sources. So Muslims do not deny that. He was meditating there. He developed this habit of going there and meditating. In the year 610, when he was 40, he claimed that he received a revelation from God through Gabriel, the angel that appeared to Mary. And that would be the first verses of what we know today as the Quran. These 5 verses that you see are the first verses that Muhammad ever claimed to have received from God. Now it should be surah number 1. Surah means chapter. But the Quran was shuffled, as we will see. So this is now surah number 96. If you have an access to the Quran, you can go online and you can download the Quran app. There are thousands of them. And have a look at the Quran. By the way, I advise you tomorrow when we'll have the Islam Mythbuster, if you can download the Quran to your cell phone, I will allow you to use your cell phones. I'm a cool preacher. If not, you can just bring a pad and a paper and record the verses, the Quran verses that we will be sharing, because I promise you, you will be quoting them for the rest of your lives. Muhammad continued to receive those revelations for the rest of his life. The Quran was supposedly written down by Muhammad's companions while he was alive, but was not compiled. It was compiled and standardized to the form that we know today under the 3rd successor of Muhammad. His name is Uthman. The first person who believed in Muhammad's message was his wife Khadija. By the way, Muhammad continued to have one wife, that would be Khadija, until she died. Which probably means that he was a follower of one of those Jewish Christian heresies which respected the sanctity of marriage, of one man and one woman. Then Ali, his cousin. Then Zayd, his foster son. By the way, adoption is banned in Islam because Muhammad coveted and took away his foster son's wife for himself. That would, of course, be considered an incest. The Quran said, well, it's not an incest because he's technically not your son. And then Abu Bakr, his friend, who would later be the first caliph or successor of Muhammad. That name probably rings a bell because there is another caliph that is called Abu Bakr. That would be the current leader of ISIS, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Muhammad proclaimed his message in secret for 3 years, then he turned public. By the way, at that time, Muhammad was passive, peaceful, was only calling Arabs to worship the one God that the Jews and Christians believe in. He was calling them to believe in the Bible. He was humble. He was every good thing that you can imagine, of course, because he did not have the chance to be as violent as he later turned. Within almost 10 years, hundreds of people converted into Islam. Whole tribes proclaimed loyalty to Muhammad. Then the persecution began. Muhammad delivered verses in the Quran that condemned idol worship. Islam is very strict against idolatry and polytheism. That's why ISIS is destroying those historical artifacts in Nineveh and in Syria, because they consider them idols, even though they are not worshipped anymore. That was, of course, offensive to the Meccan forefathers who made business of polytheism. Remember when Paul went to Ephesus in Acts 19, why he was persecuted? Because he was preaching the one God, and somebody was making a business by making statues of Diana or Artemis. And he ran out of business because this Paul was preaching the one God. Well, that was the same reason why Muhammad and his followers were persecuted. Because those Meccan leaderships were making business of those pagan, the idols that used to be in the Kaaba, the Muslim place of worship that we will see right after this slide, the Grand Mosque. That cube-shaped building is called Kaaba, which literally means cube in Arabic. It used to have idols in them, 360 idols. It is now, of course, considered by Muslims to be the holiest place on earth. So, the early Muslims were persecuted. Sumayya would be the first one who was murdered because of her Muslim faith. Muslims escaped to Ethiopia. Muhammad himself escaped to the Saudi city of At-Ta'if, but came back because he was stoned almost to death there. Important clans declared a public boycott, the 7th century's version of the sanctions, against Banu Hashim, their commercial rival, to pressure it into withdrawing its protection of Muhammad. Things started to get from bad to worse in Muhammad's life. Some resources say that in the year 619, known in the Muslim world as the year of sorrow, he almost committed suicide because his wife and his uncle, both very strong supporters of him, died in that year. And then everything started to turn around. Luck smiled to Muhammad when a delegation consisting of the representatives of the 12 important tribes in another city in Saudi Arabia called Medina invited Muhammad to technically be the leader of that city. They said, well, we like the way you lead things. You are a good leader, so why don't you come over, and instead of you being a religious leader persecuted, we will make you the political and military leader of our city. Muhammad arrived at Medina at the age of 53 on Friday, September 27th in the year 622. That day is the first day of the first month of the first year in the Islamic calendar, called the Hijri calendar. Muslims use another calendar than the solar calendar that we use, the Gregorian calendar. They have a lunar calendar that is called the Hijri calendar. Hijra means migration. A major turning point in its history. Muslims now became powerful after they were persecuted. This is the route of the Hijra, the migration of Muhammad from Mecca to Medina. A very interesting thing to notice, that migration was parallel to the Red Sea. But the migration that God engineered was across the Red Sea. One of them obviously had God's autograph, but not the other. This line is the migration, the Hijra. This is the timeline. Muhammad before the Hijra, Muhammad after the Hijra. I hope this can explain the confusion in the religion of Islam, which we will deal with tomorrow evening, Lord willing, in our Islam Mythbuster session. Before the Hijra, Islam was peaceful. Muhammad was peaceful. After the Hijra, he became violent. Islam started as a word that means submission. We studied that the word Islam literally means submission. So it started as a way to God, the biblical way to God for the Arabs. The gospel of Muhammad to the Arabs, to worship the same God that Muhammad supposed Jews and Christians worship. Later, the word Islam became generic to describe a separate religion when Muhammad introduced a different kosher law called the halal law than the biblical kosher law in Leviticus 11. That was the first time Muhammad ever claimed to have a different message than that known to be in the Bible. That's when Islam became a separate way to God, but an alternative way to God. You can still be a Jew and a Christian and go to heaven. After that, after the Hijra, when Muslims became powerful enough, Islam was claimed to be the only way to God, and it is not good that you follow any other religion. In fact, war was waged against anyone who followed any other way than Muhammad. If the Quran was arranged in a chronological order, then people would not be confused. We would not see politicians and smart people on TV trying to make sense of Islam. This man says that Islam is a religion of peace, and that man says it is a religion of terrorism, and that man says since 99% of Muslims in the world are peaceful, then Islam is a religion of peace. That doesn't make any sense, because a faith is not based on its followers. Most people in the Christian world we know to be completely non-Christians. But Islam, the Quran, is not arranged in a chronological order. It was shuffled as you shuffle a pack of playing cards. That's why you would read violent passages, then you would read peaceful passages, then you would read violent passages again, and people cannot make sense of that confusion in Islam. We will learn how to make sense of Islam tomorrow, Lord willing. In March 624, Muhammad led 313 warriors to raid a Meccan caravan, merchant caravan. That caravan was protected by a force of 1,000 men, volunteered to protect that caravan. That was the first battle Muslims ever had. Muslims won that battle, outnumbered 3-1. They still believe that this was an act of God. That battle is known as the Battle of Badr. Muslims won all the next campaigns. Muslims are good fighters. And in the year 630, Muhammad actually marched back from Medina to Mecca with a great power, taking control of it, supposedly declaring amnesty for most of its people, and destroyed the idols in Kaaba. Kaaba is still considered by Muslims to be the... in fact, Muslims bow down to Mecca 5 times a day in their prayers. Most Meccans converted to Islam, and Muhammad died at the age of 63 and was buried in the first mosque that was ever built in Islam, called Al-Masjid Al-Nabawi in Medina, Saudi Arabia. Before his death, Muhammad conquered and united all Arabia. Remember that white space between the Roman and the Persian Empire? It is now one nation, and this is like within around 10 years. It is now one nation that has one leadership and one army, and they are so full of determination. They conquered Iraq in the year 636, destroyed the Persian army that was controlling Iraq, still does, in the year 642. Then they conquered Jerusalem in 638. Then Egypt in 639. Look how fast they are going. Then they expanded all the way to China in the east and France in the west. Within, I don't know, like a century, around a century, before their advance in Europe was stopped by the Franks, led by Charles Martel, the grandfather of Charlemagne, or Charles the Great. He was the one who stopped Muslims from taking over all Europe. Without that battle, the Battle of Tours in October 732, you would all be Muslims. This is the Islamic State around the year 750 AD. And Muhammad died in 732, 632. And you can imagine how fast they were going. Because of some corruption, and because of the Sunni Shiite division, some internal problems, the Islamic State became weak and fell with the fall of Baghdad to the Mongols in the year 1258. The Islamic State was revived not by the Arabs, but by the Turks when the Ottoman Empire was established in the 1500s. That also fell at the end of World War I. And now that Islamic State is planned to be revived by people like ISIS, which means the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, and groups like Hamas and Hezbollah and Al-Qaeda. And that's what Muslims eventually want. That's what Islam is telling them to do, to wage war until the whole world is converted to Islam. I hope that clarified some of the main landmarks in the Islamic history and gave you an idea about how that religion, which is one of the biggest religions in the world, started and grew. Tomorrow we will be talking about the beliefs of Islam. And the day after tomorrow we will be talking about what to do with that and how to preach the gospel to the Muslim people. May God bless your night.